Welcome back. To meet Canada's global commitments on carbon reduction, we have to do more. One estimate is that aiming for about 50% below the country's 2005 carbon output level by 2035 is the right balance to get us there, but that is still an ambitious target. Rick Smith is president of the Canadian Climate Institute. Rick, thanks for being with us.
Good to be here.
So we are not actually tracking to meeting our obligations, even with the carbon pricing we have in place. I wanted to start there because we're now in this situation where it might be removed. There are people who don't like the carbon price at all. But let's just start with the context of, is it even working so far?
Well, there are a lot of things working about the current system that we have, and of course, when it comes to carbon reduction, Amanda, there's no silver bullet. I mean, we literally produce carbon in all aspects of our lives, of our industry, and so we need a suite of policies, incentives to move carbon reduction forward, not just because the atmosphere needs that, but because when it comes to commerce globally, decarbonization is the name of the game. There's lots of money to be made in this economy, and we want Canada to keep pace. So by our estimates, our institute's estimates, between 2022 and 2023, our country's emissions came down by about 1% across the board. Not bad, a step forward, but clearly, as you say, we need to accelerate, and we've suggested a few things to the federal government and to provincial governments, because let's not forget we're in a federation, and so there's a big provincial role here. We've made a few suggestions of things that could be done to get us on track.
I want to ask you about the most common criticism of the price on carbon, and that is that it hurts consumers and it hurts businesses. People refer to it as a tax. It's a drag on our economic output. How do we sell something that does actually create kind of economic damage in the short term?
Well, I think there's been far too much emphasis in our country on the carbon tax. By our institute's estimates, this one policy, best case scenario, may contribute 10% of necessary reductions by 2030. Meanwhile, the industrial price on carbon, what large trade exposed industries pay in our country, both to reduce emissions and to create a credit market that's lucrative for them. That industrial carbon pricing system is far more important, probably 3 to 4 times more important than the consumer carbon tax. There's all sorts of other stuff going on, Amanda, different policies in different sectors that are also contributing. So, I think there's a real mismatch between the fixation in our country talking about this carbon tax and its actual effectiveness in contributing to emissions reduction.
Interesting. So if, for instance, we saw the carbon tax, the one that people feel at the pump for when they go to get gasoline, disappear, would you still be satisfied if there was an industrial price on carbon that did increase over time as it's expected to?
Well, we're in this weird place at the moment in Canada where by far the most important policy contributing to emission reduction, we're talking a policy that's probably worth 30 to 40% of the solution. That is the industrial carbon price, which, of course, originated provincially. So lots of support for this thing provincially, lots of support amongst important industry groups. Yes, it needs improving. Yes, we need to link up provincial markets. But it's by and large, it's working. Mm-hmm. And so we're in this weird place in our country where we're not talking about necessary improvements to the policies that are contributing the most to emission reduction, and we think we need to get there. Another important thing going on, if you want to draw a thread between decarbonization and industrial sectors, between different industrial sectors, that's electrification, and clean electricity is making big inroads in every province.
So do you feel confident that Canada will stay on track to meeting its obligations with, as you say, the suite of policies that we have in place and others that might come?
Well, things are going really well in some industrial sectors. I mean, between 2022, 2023, emissions in the electricity sector and the energy sector went down by 6% in 1 year. It's incredible. Meanwhile, emissions from oil and gas and from buildings, for instance, continue to increase. So I think what we have at the moment is a bit of a mixed bag Clearly, we're sending the right policy signals, right incentive signals to some parts of the economy. We need to pull up our socks when it comes to other parts of the economy.
So good to have you, Rick. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much.
Rick Smith is president of the Canadian Climate Institute. Is a price on carbon the only way to get to our climate change goals? And if killing our economy is the result, is it worth the effort? Ken Green is a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute. Thanks for being here, Ken.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
So let's start with the obvious, which is, what don't people like about a price on carbon?
Well, I'm not sure how other people feel, but I dislike the price on carbon for several reasons. One is that it's a purely symbolic action. Canada's emissions in the global context are so small, and any reduction that would happen because of a carbon tax is even smaller than that it could have no impact at all on the trajectory of climate change or mitigating climate risks to Canadians. And so it's really a purely symbolic act, and I don't think that symbolic government is particularly a good thing. Also, like any taxes, carbon taxes impose a drag on the economy. Being taxed on energy, which of course underpins the entire economy, it's a pretty significant drag, and broadly across the economy and people's personal household economies as well, since people use a lot of energy in Canada, partly because of the climate and partly because of the quality of life. Another reason to dislike the carbon tax is that for a carbon tax to be efficient, economists will tell you this. I'm not an economist, but I play one on TV now and then. But for a carbon tax to be efficient and do minimal economic harm, it has to be free from other distorting regulations. It has to be applied uniformly across the whole economy. It has to be applied uniformly across industries. It can't be used, the revenues can't be used to distort other economic activities, and it has to be completely, truly revenue neutral across the country. Canada's carbon tax is none of those things.
Right.
And in fact, I don't think it can be repaired because the incentives to make all of these other distortions are built into Canada's economic system, system of governance and economy. So those are the main reasons why I think a carbon tax is a bad idea. So it's simply a general tax that raises costs on people's lives.
Let me ask you, in the context of kind of the global effort, and obviously Canada is a small economy and therefore a small emitter, but we are part of a global effort and we have commitments to meet. What about the argument that we cannot meet our commitments to the Paris Agreement, for instance, unless we have some kind of price on carbon that helps us measure and reduce?
Well, I would say we won't make those targets even if we do have a price on carbon, and even if it's higher than the one we have, because the task of decarbonizing the economy is vastly harder than has been portrayed by people who are pushing that agenda. I think more realistically, Canada is going to have to eventually back away from those global agreements and the targets, net zero by 2050 and so forth, because they're simply technologically unachievable with a tax, without a tax, with more regulations, without regulations, because energy use is so integral to Canada's economic prosperity, we can't do without it. And so at every step where it winds up turning out that we're going to have to cut back energy use, the policies will be backed away from in order to preserve the economy and preserve Canada's way of life and Canadians' quality of life. So I think they're going to have to leave those agreements.
We are seeing, though, the world moving to a form of pricing. The majority of the largest economies, including China, have some form of carbon pricing. The U.S. not there yet, but we do expect them to get there. But more importantly, Ken, as we see, for instance, the EU imposing a carbon adjustment tax on trade, doesn't it make sense for Canadian businesses to have in their toolbox some way to measure and value the carbon that they produce or don't produce, which would be the incentive?
Well, I think there's some logic from an industry standpoint or from a private standpoint in people measuring their greenhouse gas emissions and then using that data to navigate international barriers to trade and things like that. But again, I mean, I really don't think that either the taxes in the European countries are going to have any significant impact on reducing climate risk or climate change or significantly reducing the trend of greenhouse gas emissions over time. And so I think, as I said, I think the targets that have been picked that these taxes are in service of will fall by the wayside eventually, and the taxes will be revealed just as a tax, an energy tax, which most governments have wanted to impose for a long time.
Yeah. We got to leave it there, Ken. So good to have you for this. Appreciate your view.
Good to be with you, Amanda. Take care.
Kenneth Green is a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute. Coming up, no policy initiative will last without public buy-in. So how are we doing on carbon pricing? Stay with us.